Good evening, and thank you so much for your attendance. We are truly excited about the comprehensive master plan recommendations being brought forth for our students. From the facility improvements to the instructional expansions, we are paving the way to the success for our scholars. We've provided opportunities for your voices to be heard, and we have listened. The CMP team has provided us with excellent options to keep DeKalb moving forward. As you prepare to receive the recommendations, please keep in mind what we have said throughout this process. Everyone won't get everything, but everyone will get something. Without further ado, I will turn the floor over to my teammates on the Comprehensive Master Plan team.
Thank you, Superintendent Watson-Harris, for the kind introduction. We're delighted to be here. Hi, my name is Jared Serwer. I'm an architect with Perkins & Will, and along with my partners Barbara Crum and Stephen Brown, I'm excited to share with you the latest updates on DeKalb County Schools' Comprehensive Master Plan. This is a 10-year planning document intended to help the district optimize its use of educational facilities for the benefit of DeKalb County students over the long term. With today's presentation, we want to bring you up to speed on our progress by sharing what we heard in response to our regional presentations earlier this fall, surveys, and our ongoing conversations with internal and external district stakeholders. Reviewing the data that underpins the recommendations we are making as part of the CMP, sharing a list of recommended projects. We're going to talk about how the district can pay for those projects and the timeline for implementing them. And finally, we'll share high-level ideas for how the redistricting can be implemented between now and 2031, as well as some of the immediate next steps in this process. As I've already mentioned, the CMP is asking all district stakeholders to think big about the next 10 years. Some of the big ideas that will help us get from now to 2031 include new buildings, early learning centers in every region to help make sure that DeKalb County students are prepared for success in elementary school and beyond, developing a K-8 model that helps smooth the transition from elementary school to high school and keeps more students in the system, school mergers that will help take better advantage of resources to provide expanded programs and student support, and the addition of new curricular programs that will help prepare DeKalb students for the changing needs of employers. For those that may not have had a chance to see some of our earlier presentations, we'd like to make sure that you're aware of the year-plus process that has led to this point. We collected data on the district school facilities and compiled them into facility condition assessments and educational suitability assessments. We conducted an inventory of school choice programs so that we could understand what opportunities are available throughout the district. We worked with our partners at Cropper GIS to develop robust demographic forecasts for enrollment across the district between now and 2031. We engaged in a broad and deep process of stakeholder engagement using a variety of methods and channels. I know that I personally have had the pleasure of speaking to many of DeKalb's most engaged citizens about their perspective on the school district and the needs of the communities they represent. We then used all of this data to develop a series of options for the CMP, which we refined with input from the public, internal district staff, and various school communities. The result is the ideas that we are sharing here. Working with the district staff, we have developed a feasible implementation plan and schedule that is tied to financial analysis of the funds available to the district now and projected into the future. We are now in the final phase of the process. We're developing a final CMP for review of the school board early in 2022. As you know, we made a number of presentations this fall sharing some of our big ideas about the CMP, and through that process, we received a lot of really helpful feedback. We heard lots of positive feedback on the idea of prioritizing a performing arts academy, positive feedback about expanding the magnet of Wadsworth to 8th grade. We heard lots of positive feedback on the idea of implementing K-8s in the district and lots of curiosity about how this would be done. And just to be clear, the implementation of K-8s does not mean changing the middle school curricular program. There would still be the same looping and other features that are particular to middle school, but they would take advantage of space in some of the prototype elementary schools by implementing some minor retrofits to accommodate science labs and other needs. We in the district are also aware that K-8s present some new challenges to athletics, not least the need for facilities that may not currently be available at some of the proposed sites. The district is aware of this challenge and will be studying possible solutions, including shared facilities, but we think that the athletics component can be solved in a straightforward way. And we should note that no K-8 program would be implemented prior to the fall of 2023. So over the next year, the district staff will be developing detailed plans to implement these programs. Many of you responded to our preliminary suggestions for facilities that would accommodate early learning centers and wanted to know more about why certain facilities had been proposed as new early learning center locations and where students that currently attend school at those locations would go instead. We also got some specific feedback on the idea of making Pine Ridge and Rainbow Elementary in particular into early learning centers. And we want to emphasize that those proposals were first passes based on which facilities currently had the lowest utilization. But final location decisions would also need to account for geographic proximity, ease of access, and other issues particular to those communities. Finally, a number of community members pointed out that any comprehensive master plan had to take a serious approach to addressing underutilization as well as overcrowding at middle and high schools. Throughout the CMP process, several goals have been prioritized. 1, neighborhood schools. 2, diversifying student demographics. Addressing projected overcrowding and underutilization in 2031. Addressing facilities that are in poor condition. Exploring different grade configurations. And most importantly, addressing these goals while making the best use of the district's resources. So how is the CMP going to do all this? We're going to build new schools to address overcrowding. We're going to realign clusters to better balance the student populations across the district. Consolidate schools where necessary to address underutilization and poor conditions. And by creating a new K-8 model, early learning centers in every region, and proposing some new standalone magnet schools, we'll prepare students for new workforce opportunities and help balance the student population across the district.
As Jared mentioned, we talked about what we're going to do, and let me reiterate to you, a lot of these recommendations came from a lot of the data that we got from the facility assessments and from our demographer. And I'd love to share with you, before we go on and really show you the recommendations, this data to reiterate all of the information we got and really to substantiate some of the recommendations we're putting in front of you. So I'd like to share with you some of the maps from the demographers and I think I've shared this before, but I think it sets the stage for some of our recommendations. You'll see there are 3 maps on the screen: the elementary school map, the middle school map, and the high school map, reading from left to right. And basically they show what the population will look like in the 2030-2031 school year. And as you see in the elementary school map, you'll see the red, the deep red is where there's overcrowding, the deep green is where there's underutilization. And you'll see that sort of the overcrowding and underutilization is pretty much spread throughout the district with the elementary schools. When you move to the middle and high schools, you see that really the overcrowding is very much in Region 1 and 2, a little bit of the high schools down in Region 5, but you'll see there's a great deal of underutilization in Region 3 and 5, and we're going to try and address that in the high schools and the middle schools as we go through some of our recommendations. But I think this sets the stage and really reminds us that we're looking at 2030, 2031. Nothing's going to happen tomorrow. This is long-term, but this is what it's going to look like in the district in 10 years. So again, looking at the data, I think to reiterate to you the overcrowding and what an issue the overcrowding is specifically at some of the high schools. And you'll see that Chamblee, Cross Keys, Dunwoody are all going to be over 50% more at capacity in 10 years, and Stone Mountain similarly is going to be overcrowded at 111%. Similarly, a lot of the middle schools, Sequoia, Chamblee, and Peachtree Middle, will all be overcrowded in 10 years. A number of these schools are overcrowded now, but the problem is going to increase in the next 10 years. So we really want to deal with that. Similarly, there's some overcrowding in some of the elementary schools, and some of those you'll see are among our first recommendations of things to address. And you'll see the overcrowding at Ashford Park, Livesey, Hightower, Stoneview, Idlewood, and Jolly. And so similarly, you'll see there underutilization. And one of the interesting things when we did our town halls, we talked a lot about the overcrowding and dealing with that and addressing it with new schools and dealing it with moving some of the feeder patterns in the clusters. But we didn't really point out as strongly as we probably should have the underutilization. And some of the chat in the town halls was asking us to address the underutilization and relook at these issues. So again, we looked back and we realized there are a tremendous amount of high schools and middle schools that are really underutilized. And you'll see a lot of these numbers under 50%. You'll see Towers, Redan, Columbia, under 50%, Miller Grove, Stevenson, Southwest DeKalb, McNair, Martin Luther King Jr. High School, and Cedar Grove. And one of the things that struck us is it's very hard to have all of your programs and have a really viable high school when the building's less than half full. It means that the band isn't as strong. You don't have as many students for the band, for the football team, for the arts, for many of your programs. So it really drove us to think about really seriously looking at consolidation of some of these buildings, some of these populations. Similarly, the middle schools, you'll see Bethune, Redan, Columbia, Cedar Grove, Stevenson, in the range of 50% full, Chapel Hill and Miller Grove Middle. So again, really looking at how to address this underutilization. Interesting enough, most of the underutilization is in the middle schools and the high schools. There is some forecasted in the elementaries, and basically we're dealing with these elementaries by some consolidation, some filling them with looking at K-8s to fill them with 6th, 7th, and 8th graders, and then looking at some of them as early learning centers. So again, we have a strategy to deal with all of these issues with the underutilization. The other thing, as Jared pointed out to you, one of the goals of the CMP is to deal with the schools that are in poor condition. And this will very much overlay often with the underutilization and the overcrowding. And you'll remember that Jolly, Idlewood, and Stoneview were three schools that were overcrowded in the next 10 years. And they also in poor condition, which really made them rise to the top of our recommendations that needed to be addressed as soon as possible. Similarly, Henderson Mill and Dunair and Ashford Park and Farrington and Cary Reynolds, Hawthorne, Hightower, Livesey, and Dresden are all schools that are under the 60% benchmark that we set for really saying these schools needed to be addressed. Interesting enough, a lot of the poor condition is in the elementary schools. The district has been very targeted in the last 10, 15 years of really upgrading the middle schools and high schools. Most of the high schools have either been replaced or added onto. So the poor condition is really evident in most of the elementary schools. There was one middle school, I think Salem, that scored below 60, and DeKalb Tech South, but otherwise it really is all the elementary schools. So again, we are looking at them in terms of rebuilds, consolidations, moving children around. The other thing that I think came out in the data-driven information was the conversation about grade configurations. And we looked at a lot of papers and a lot of sort of academicians' conversations about K-8s. And one of the things that came to us was that the K-8s, obviously, as we looked into it, provided a continuity of instruction. They really improved the support of social emotional learning of the kids and really keep the kids in school. We heard a lot from the PACs and the principals about attrition in the district at the middle schools. And to keep kids in middle schools, as we looked at grade configurations, and for academic reasons, the idea of K-8s really came to the fore. The other thing K-8s helped us with is there are a number of areas where the new prototype elementary schools have empty seats, and there are areas in which some of the middle schools are overcrowded. So by addressing the overcrowding at the middle school, we could use the seats in the elementaries, and that at the same time as the academic reasons that we really looked at the K-8s sort of came together and really was a win-win for us to look at doing the K-8s in a number of these buildings. So with that data-driven information where you see the overcrowding, you see the underutilization, you see the poor condition, and you see sort of the academic drivers for the K-8s, we really came to a number of recommended projects. I think a lot of you have seen these before, but I'd like to reiterate for you. We broke them down in terms of type, in terms of new schools, and in terms of consolidations. The first thing we did suggest, and I think you have seen a number of this, is moving some clusters. This was really to balance the feeder pattern so that you really take off the crowding at the high schools. You begin to redistrict kids, move them around, and it begins to really address all of that overutilization in the middle schools and high schools. So again, none of this is happening tomorrow, but within the next 5 to 10 years, we want to see Hightower move to the Chamblee cluster, we're suggesting, and Ashford Park move to the Cross Keys cluster. We also are suggesting looking at some consolidations to deal with the underutilization in Region 3s and 5. We would look at redistricting throughout this region, and in fact, some of it spills into 6 and 7. And you'll see later on, we're proposing some magnets in 6 and 7. They also are dealing with the underutilization at the high schools. Those sort of moves, those top moves there, really don't require construction. We also are suggesting the new cluster, as I think you've heard us talk about, at Sequoia, a new Sequoia High School, and that would require construction. That's a new high school, a replaced middle school, and recreating that cluster with Cary Reynolds, Dorville United, Dresden, and Oak Cliff as feeders. So again, it's balancing those populations so no middle school or high school is overcrowded. Similarly, we are suggesting magnets, and again, some of this is to deal with the underutilization at some of these high schools, and some of it is just really new programs that really, as Jared said, address preparing children for the workforce. We're suggesting creating a career tech magnet at McNair, creating a cyber technology academy at Towers, and creating and redoing and expanding the Performing Arts Academy at the Avondale site. We also are suggesting expanding Wadsworth and Kittredge to 4th through 8th grade. They now are 4th through 6th. And we heard lots of conversations from PACs and principals about it's difficult for those 6th graders to go into the middle schools when all the other children have entered at the 6th grade. So we want to expand this so all the children are entering high school at 9th grade. Again, we also are suggesting, as I said, some K-8 conversions, and the first 3 we're suggesting all address the overcrowding at the middle schools. At Austin, that would take some of the overcrowding out of Chamblee Middle, and then at Peachtree, at Dunwoody, at Austin, it takes it out of Peachtree Middle. At the new Dunwoody Chamblee, it relieves some of the overcrowding at Chamblee Middle, and at Smoke Rise, it relieves the overcrowding at Tucker. And what that means, by filling the seats in these prototype schools that have empty seats, we don't have to spend money and build classrooms at those middle schools. The new construction, as I talked about, there are a number of new construction projects, and they are dealing with poor condition and overcrowding. We are suggesting, and a project that's been on the books and really is already going ahead with, is the repurposing of the Cross Keys High School. And I think it's very important to reiterate, we are suggesting building this at the Cross Keys High School site. So we got a lot of feedback from the community. That's where they want that high school. We're suggesting a new Cross Keys Middle School. We are suggesting a new Sequoia High School and Middle School that is the basis for that new cluster. And then addressing the poor condition and the overcrowding. We think that Stoneview, Idlewood, and Jolly are the first elementaries that really need to be rebuilt. And then the next set of elementaries addressing some of the same issues: Hightower, Ashford Park, Farrington, and Chapel Hill. Also, we had conversation again with the community and many stakeholders in the Clarkston cluster, and there's a real need for a middle school closer to the high school. So we put that in the program also. And similarly, the project that's been on the books that's needed to move forward is the Druid Hills High School addition and renovation, a classroom addition at Stone Mountain High School, an addition and renovation at Clarkston High School was also on the books previously, and then the new Performing Arts Academy on the Avondale site. And we are looking at really a K-12 academy, so it would be probably 2 facilities, a K-8 facility on that site and a high school facility on that site. Consolidations, we talked a good bit about, using the district's resources wisely, and we really do think that a lot of small schools and a lot of schools that are in poor condition that really would do much better off consolidated. The programs would be increased. You get more counselors, you get more teachers. You really increase the opportunities for kids when you consolidate them. It's hard to have all the programs that really make a very viable and rich elementary school when there are only 300 or 400 children. So we are suggesting the consolidation of Stone Mill and Stone Mountain, the consolidation of Cary Reynolds and Dresden, the consolidation of Henderson Mill and Hawthorne, the consolidation of Allgood and Dunair, and the consolidation of Midville and Livesey. And again, none of this is going to happen in the next 5 years. These are long-term recommendations, but long-term we think it is the best use of the district's money. And we also think, most importantly, it enhances the programs for the students. And again, one of the things Jared referred to, we got great feedback on the idea of early learning centers, and we talked about converting some of the schools to early learning centers at this point. I think, as he said, it's still out there exactly which schools. We picked these basically because they were probably the least utilized, and they seemed like they were geographically well located, but I think that that is certainly up for discussion. We do firmly believe that in the next 10 years, all regions need an early learning center. And talk a little bit about funding. And again, this is a little bit sort of high level. This is 30,000 feet. Again, this is sort of our first look at how you might prioritize and fund these projects, working with the in-house district staff. There are a number of sources. There's some additional revenues in SPLOST 5. There's SPLOST 6 revenues that are anticipated, and then there's SPLOST 7 revenues that are anticipated but unfunded at this point. And there's the CARES Act money that the in-house folks have been working with in targeting some of the HVAC and roof replacement projects. So just looking at sort of prioritizing the projects with the funding, the available funding. There is some anticipated additional revenues coming in the SPLOST 5 package, and the things that we have sort of brought up to that are things that really were talked about previously. One of the ones that we really are beginning to look at and getting going immediately is the repurposed Cross Keys High School. That is, as I said to you, on that site, possibly using part of the existing building, but really doing a new high school on the existing Cross Keys site. We also brought to the fore the consolidation of Cary Reynolds and Dresden on the Dresden site, and we think that's an important project to do as soon as we can because it opens up the Sequoia site. The plan is to build a new Sequoia High School and Middle School on the site that's now occupied by Sequoia Middle School and Cary Reynolds Elementary. So as soon as we can move Cary Reynolds Elementary, we can begin to look at that site for the consolidation or the building of the middle school and high school for the Sequoia cluster. And in the program, you'll see we have $10 million sort of from the additional revenues from SPLOST 5 dedicated to start that design. The construction money wouldn't come in till later, but we could get that design started immediately. That is a big priority project we've seen as the number of trailers on that site and the need for another high school in Region 1. Similarly, the K-8 right now, the Dunwoody, Chambly, Shallowford Road site elementary is under construction, and we could convert that, to do the design to convert that to a K-8 while it's under construction, create a flex academy, the need for the virtual academy to have a home, and then similar to the design of the Sequoia Middle School and High School, we are suggesting taking $10 million and starting the design of the Performing Arts Academy. And then the projects that we're talking about doing in SPLOST 6 are the next set of priority projects. And again, the Sequoia High School and Middle School is so important to deal with the overcrowding and to really deal with the condition of that middle school building. So that's a top priority. The addition renovation at Druid Hills is a top priority. The new Cross Keys Middle School, because once you build the Sequoia cluster, you're going to need a middle school for the Cross Keys cluster. And then Stoneview, Idlewood, and Jolly again rose to the top because of the condition of the buildings and the overcrowding. And then also we are saying we would like to do the K-8 at Austin and at Smoke Rise because that relieves the overcrowding at Peachtree Middle and at Tucker Middle. And similarly, we think, one of the early projects we'd like to do is create the Career Tech Academy at McNair and the Cyber Academy at Towers, again, to really enliven those schools, to bring kids there and do those opportunities to really prepare children for the workforce. The next list of projects is projects that we really would, want to keep in the program. They are unfunded at this point. We've talked about possible other sources of funding, and we will go through that with the board and with the internal staff. But on that list is, of course, Hightower and Ashford Park that are both overcrowded, the classroom addition at Clarkston, the middle school at Clarkston, the classroom addition at Stone Mountain, the new Farrington and New Chapel Hill elementaries, and then the consolidations. And then also the Performing Arts Center. While we would like to do the design as soon as possible, there may not be funding for the construction for a number of years out. Again, if there's additional monies coming in SPLOST 6, if we look at different sources of funding, many of these projects may move up. But right now, we really had to take a hard look at what we could put in SPLOST 6, and that's how the project's sort of falling out at this point. There are, of course, I just want to reiterate to you, and I think we've showed you this before, a number of funded HVAC and roof projects. A number of these, or most of these, all of these, are either in design or in construction. So these have been designated. The funding has been designated for each of these, and they are underway. There's also a number of projects that are planned, HVAC and roof projects, and you can see these here. This is really one of the first things we heard at all of our meetings with the school principals and PACs was the conditions of the schools and the need to address the HVAC and roofs. So we were very serious about saying to the district, we need to do this. This is the first thing out of the gate we'd like to see done. And again, the district has been very responsive in looking at this. The number of projects, as I said, underway, and number of projects planned. And you can see the number of schools with CARES Act and SPLOST, it's either SPLOST 5 or undesignated money at this point, but planned to be in SPLOST 6 and 7 to go ahead and address all of the HVAC and roof projects at these schools.
As Jared stated at the beginning of this presentation, this is a 10-year plan for the district. So what does this timeline look like for projects that we have identified? Barbara discussed the projects based on how they'll be funded, so I'd like to show you how this works out from a timeline perspective. Starting next year, we're recommending relocating Carrie Reynolds Elementary School, expanding Wadsworth to a 4-8, and starting the design for a new Performing Arts Academy at the Avondale site. The second group of projects will extend through 2025. These will include the new Cross Keys High School, new elementaries for Stoneview, Idlewood, and Jolly, as well as creating academies at McNair and Towers. The group of projects listed in green on the right will extend from 2026 through 2030. These will include the new Ashford Park Elementary School, Clarkston Middle School, several consolidations, and the early learning centers in regions 1 through 6. We've taken this list of projects and laid them out on a timeline chart so you can see the design, construction, as well as the opening dates for each project. The projects listed here on this slide are the SPLOST 5 and 6 projects that are shown on blue on the previous slide that start next year and will extend through 2025. These projects that we listed here are the ones from SPLOST 7, and these are the ones that are forecasted. That'll start in 2027 and it'll extend out through 2031. I find these timelines a great visual to help you see how many projects will be going on across the district every year for the next 10 years. I'd also like to talk about redistricting and how this will be impacted by the recommendations of the Comprehensive Master Plan. When will you see redistricting? It will occur as schools move clusters to balance feeder program patterns, when schools are consolidated, or when new schools are built. We have a series of maps that our consultant has put together to help show you how these recommendations will impact redistricting. As we noted, these are conceptual, and the district will provide exact details as these projects come online. This first slide of priority projects we put together so you can see across the district where all the priority projects are located. These include early childhood centers, K-8s, magnets, classroom additions, consolidations, and new schools. We wanted to include this map so you can see across the district how all areas will be impacted. As we mentioned in the past, everyone gets something. All these priority projects aren't isolated to one specific region. The next 3 slides we have are shown conceptual redistricting maps for elementary, middle, and high schools, and they show what it looks like in 2025 and 2030. All the hard lines that you see on the map on the left here are shown as our existing boundary lines. When a school is impacted by redistricting, you can see that these lines become less defined. For this slide for elementary schools, you'll see on the left that for the Region 1, you'll see it shift in 2025, and then by 2030 on the right, all lines are impacted. For middle schools, most regions will be impacted by 2025, as you can see on the left, and then again in 2030 where all regions are impacted. Again, for high schools, the majority will see changes by 2025, and again, all regions will be impacted by 2030. Again, we just want to reiterate that all areas of the district will be impacted over the next 10 years. So what are the next steps? We are working to complete the draft CMP document. This will be presented to the public in mid-December. Again, we'll present CMP updates at the January board meeting. We'll also present a timeline for investigating underutilization at the January Committee of the Whole. In February, you'll see that the Board of Education will accept the CMP. They'll also vote on changes to the capital improvement projects, as well as the fall 2022 changes. This is a lot of information to digest, and we look forward to hearing your feedback and questions at the Q&A session on December 14th. And again, we'd just like to reiterate and say thank you, and then I'd like to turn it over to Superintendent Watson-Harris for closing remarks.
Thank you so much for your attendance this evening. We sincerely hope that you have listened and begun to digest the recommendations presented. The approval of these options means better facilities for our students, innovative courses of study, as well as a launching pad to academic success with the addition of 6 new early learning centers. We are moving onward and upward in DeKalb County School District. On December 14th, we will reconvene to address any questions you may have. Thank you again for your time and attention, and we look forward to communing with you on December 14th.